God, by definition, is beyond any human capacity to fully understand. So when you demand proof in such a way that you can fully understand it, it's self-contradictory. And you should probably stop doing that because it makes you look silly.
No, asking for proof that something ridiculous like God exists is something that you should be doing and does not make you look silly. I'm so frustrated over this video because he's sitting there telling people that you just gotta believe him and to not ask questions. Don't ask for proof because this is one of the most unprovable things that you could ever ask for proof for. So you just gotta believe that God exists because it's a test of faith. If God has a real effect on our universe, we should be able to detect and quantify that. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? So tonight we are going to be taking a look at a Catholic apologist who is going to be presenting some mathematical proof for God. This is specifically like a mathematical proof, like we're trying to prove some kind of mathematical theorem or something like that, and that theorem is God exists.
A few weeks ago, I made a video that I titled something like Undeniable Proof of God's Existence. And the point of that video was to illustrate how inconsistent and illogical it is to demand undeniable proof of God's existence before you will explore the possibility of his existence.
Well, so right off the bat here, I just want to say that while there may be some people that demand absolute proof or undeniable proof of God's existence, I really don't think that you have to provide that in order to establish that God more than likely exists. And honestly, I would hope that that's what most people want that don't already believe in a God. Not hard, undeniable proof that he exists, but at least evidence that leans us in the direction that God exists. And so I kind of feel like it's a bit of a straw man that he was tackling with his first video, which I watched it. There really wasn't anything to say about it because he doesn't really cover any kind of undeniable proof. He just says it's bullshit to want undeniable proof of God's existence. You just gotta believe in faith in a book. A book. People wrote a book and therefore believe it, motherfucker. That's my own interpretation of what he said. So I mean, I paraphrased a little bit there. We don't really want undeniable proof, just we want evidence that leans us in the direction that a God most likely exists.
And unfortunately, a large portion of people commenting on that video expressed feelings of having been cheated by the fact that they thought I was promising to deliver undeniable proof rather than talk about this unreasonable standard, which, in my opinion, kind of proves the point of the video. And while so many became fixated on the title of that video, the actual thesis of that video was left unanswered by these critics, including some who made video responses of their own.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you get when you clickbait your videos like you do. It's not like the viewer's fault. I feel like it's kind of upon you to accurately represent the video. Although I do have to say that if you watch the video and all you have to do is complain about it, I just don't see the value in just bitching and complaining about a video. I mean, if you wanted to bring up something, you know, some kind of counterpoint or something like that, I feel like that's beneficial, but just bitching about it. Maybe that's just my own personal opinion. I hardly ever comment on other people's videos on here, like actually in the comment section. So
I thought I'd do a follow-up to that video to try to illustrate the point of that video a little bit better, while also offering a proof that so many complained was absent in the other video.
Typically, most arguments for God's existence are purely philosophical in nature. There's no real hard evidence that suggests that God exists. That's why all of the arguments are philosophical. They have to try to logically get to the conclusion that God must exist. I feel like it's very hard to provide mathematical proof for it, considering that it's a largely philosophical kind of discussion. So I don't know. I feel like using the math route is not the correct way to argue.
So before I present the proof in question here, I want to provide a little more context about it, as well as an explanation for how I'm going to present it and why. The first thing I want to point out about it is that it seems to be relatively unknown outside of academic circles. I only learned about it relatively recently, which is surprising considering that I've been reading about and learning about arguments and proofs for God's existence for as long as I've been a Christian, which is over 15 years now. And whenever I've mentioned this or I brought it up in conversation with other well-informed theists and Christians, I've yet to meet somebody who is actually familiar with it. And that seems revealing to me. There aren't many commentaries about it, and there are even less people who can understand it well enough to discuss it in meaningful ways.
So let me get this straight. You're providing an argument for God's existence that's a mathematical proof, and you're prefacing your entire video with saying, listen, most people are too dumb to really understand this argument, but I'm going to provide it for you as an actual undeniable argument for God's existence.
I said it's really no different than from when Christians say that, you have to be a true believer to understand God's word or what it's like to be a Christian. So it's something that, that's worse actually, because it's not understandable. I mean, some people do understand math. It's a silly argument to say. A lot of people probably won't understand it, but that doesn't mean it's not true.
Right. Well, I feel like in order to use it, you have to actually explain how it does prove that God exists. And I feel like he's just going to present like whatever, and he's going to be able to get away with it because he's like, look, I told you you're too dumb to understand it. There's a lot of people out there that are too dumb to understand it. Actually, 99.9% of people are too dumb to understand this argument. Just trust me that it proves God exists.
That's that good old arrogance we've talked about.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much, honey, for providing your commentary. So one of the reasons why I felt like I was at least a little bit prepared to take on this argument is because for my bachelor's degree, I have a minor in mathematics. I could have and I should have done a double major in mathematics. I feel like I do have the skills to be able to decipher what this mathematical proof is. Although I did watch this beforehand, I still don't understand how it proves God. It just seemed like a whole bunch of gobbledygook. But we're going to go through his proof, which doesn't appear till like the very end of the video, so I'm going to mostly let him talk. I'm going to try to mostly let him talk.
The fact that it is less conspicuous than more popular proofs and arguments like the Kalam cosmological argument or St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways isn't because of some deficiency in the argument, but rather because I think there are so few people who are up to the task of wrestling with it.
Those other arguments really aren't all that spectacular. They're pretty bad, actually. So I really don't think that this one's going to be any better.
The point being that there are only a select few who can make heads or tails of it. And what this means is that this may very well represent the limits of what human thought can produce on the question of God's existence.
I feel like if the Christian God is real and he has the ability and has in fact intervened in our world, in our universe, I feel like that should be testable and quantifiable. In the Old Testament, God did shit all the time. He intervened in our world. Even now, you have Christians, just like Brian here, who say that God intervenes all the time. So I feel like that with the idea that God regularly intervenes in our reality, it should be a quantifiable and testable thing for us to determine whether or not this God actually exists. So I get that our own human experience is a bit limited and we'll never know if we have all of the knowledge that we could ever possibly get. But I do definitely feel like if God has those properties of intervening in our reality, we should be able to detect him. I feel like that is a very logical thing to expect.
There are critiques of this proof, but even they seem to lack the kind of confidence that you usually find in explicit refutations. They seem to be more questioning its implications and its axioms than anything else. And yes, it does rely on axioms, which seems to be the source of the only complaints that I've read about it. But if your only complaint is that the axioms can't be proven, well, then I think you run the risk of throwing out the baby with the bathwater just to avoid God's existence.
If I just have an axiom that says that the magical squirrel spilled his nuts and created this universe, I could create axioms around that idea. And if I can't actually prove that those axioms are true in some kind of sense, then what good are they? If you have an axiom that can't be substantiated in any kind of way, then you can't really use that axiom to build a case off of it. You have to be able to prove that your axiom is true in the first place. You don't just get to make up random shit and say, oh, that's an axiom, so therefore God exists. That's a really dumbed down, I guess, kind of way to look at it, but I'm just saying that you can't just make up shit and then proclaim that God exists. You're just doing it in a mathematical way.
Because the fundamental laws of logic are axioms that can't be proven, not the least of which is the assumption that the universe and all of reality is intelligible such that human reason can be applied to it in meaningful ways.
I don't think that that's necessarily proof of God, though. I mean, I've heard this, that reason itself, it existing, proves God. All reason does is show that you have a complex enough nervous system in order to be able to reason. Like, without God existing, reason would still exist. Reason is just remaining consistent and logical in your argument or your thought process. So I don't see how that necessarily entails that God exists. Also, another thing that he said is that because our universe is intelligible and we can reason our way around it, that means God exists. I really contest the whole idea of shit's intelligible, therefore God. I mean, it's only intelligible to a mind that can make sense of it.
For example, in many of the responses to my previous video, quite a few people said that anything that exists must be empirically demonstrable. And since nobody's been able to do that in the case of God, or so it's claimed, then there is no proof of God's existence.
It's not that there's no proof of God's existence, because I take it here what he means by proof is just evidence that God exists, and that would be good evidence that God exists. Generally, people leave out the specifier of it being good evidence that he exists. It's just that this evidence that you claim supports your conclusion doesn't actually support your conclusion. That's what we're trying to get through to you with that particular statement.
But the claim that the only kind of valid knowledge is empirical knowledge is not itself empirically proven, which either makes it an axiom adopted on faith, which atheists like Bertrand Russell admitted, or it's self-refuting.
I really don't think that it's not empirically proven that things with empirical evidence are all that we can say definitely exists. I kind of feel like if you don't have empirical evidence for something, then you really can't come to the conclusion that it does exist or it does happen. So I would agree that everything that does exist and does happen has to have some kind of empirical evidence behind it. And the axiom, because he was talking about like logic axioms and things of that nature, which he claims doesn't really have any kind of substance behind them. We can provide mathematical proofs in general, behind the logic that we have, like the rules of the axioms of the logic that we have. I remember taking a class, it was a computer science class in college, where that's exactly what we did. We took the logic as far as like mathematics goes, like representing the logic that you use in philosophy and stuff, representing that as math. You can prove the logic behind that, right? We have mathematical proofs for that. We have mathematical proofs for just about everything in math. So I don't understand why he's saying that these are axioms that we don't have proofs for, when we do have empirical and mathematical proofs that these axioms are inherently true.
The other thing I should mention, because this may seem curious, but I think I have good reason for doing this, which reinforces the point and the thesis of this video, is that I'm not going to tell you who came up with this proof, except to say that for anyone who is familiar with them, they are universally acknowledged as one of the greatest minds to ever exist. Full stop. The takeaway from that should be that before anyone convinces themselves that they have a valid refutation of this argument, they will also have to convince themselves that they have somehow detected an error that one of the greatest logicians ever somehow missed.
Okay, I feel like this is just an argument from authority. One of the quote-unquote greatest minds ever came up with this, therefore it's true. You can't sit there and be like, I'm not going to tell you who it is. He's a bad motherfucker, though. And that's why it's true. And that's why any refutation that you have is going to be invalid, because you're going to have to sit there and tell me that one of the greatest minds of our existence says that it's true. This is just an argument from authority that's meant to confuse people into thinking, oh, well, shit, I guess we can't refute this motherfucker. He can do math in his sleep, and fuck me, I guess it's true. I feel like that's the end goal of any kind of argument from authority. It's to get you to stop thinking. It's to get you to stop questioning and just accept what you're being told. I've always advocated to ask questions and really try to understand these things for yourself. I never try to portray myself as some kind of authority that can't be questioned. And I think that if anybody is going to give you some kind of proof for God or anything else, and they're like, trust me, I'm an authority, or trust me, I'm an expert in this, I feel like you should definitely question what they're fucking telling you, because anybody that is really sincere in what they're telling you will want to field questions if you have questions.
Which is to say, what's more likely, that they're wrong or that you're wrong? The reason I'm not going to reveal the originator of this proof is because I want you and you alone to either concede it or refute it without running away to some other source to do the heavy lifting of refuting it for you. Because you're the one asking for reasonable, rational proof in this case. If you have to go to somebody else to do the heavy lifting to refute it for you, then this isn't an exercise in reason for you, it's an exercise in faith in someone else's reason.
Well, no, I mean, you're basically shitting on people wanting to hear both sides of the argument. You're wanting to hear the positive argument for it, and then you don't want them to hear anything else. You started off this entire video by telling people that they were too dumb to even understand this particular piece of evidence, or this proof. And now you're telling them, hey, don't go to other people so that they can explain to you why it's all fuckered. You got to try to figure it out for yourself. You're basically tying both hands behind their back and telling them, just believe what I'm telling you. I feel like that kind of thought-stopping rhetoric should always be questioned.
If you have to rely on someone else to do that for you, then you shouldn't be asking for a proof that is beyond your intellectual ability to understand. Because anyone who insists that God be proven to them has to expect that whatever proof is offered is one that they can understand. That's the only way that something can be proven to someone. If the recipient of a proof can't understand that proof, then it hasn't been proven to them. For example, if I recite Boyle's Law to my 4-year-old son, can it really be said that I had proven it to him, considering that he won't understand it? The answer is no. Whatever consideration he has for its validity isn't based on his intellectual scrutiny of it, but whether or not he believes me when I tell him that it's true. For him, this isn't a matter of reason, but of faith as to whether or not he adopts it, because his reason can't grasp it.
Let me see if I can summarize so far as this video goes on. Listen, you're too dumb to understand this mathematical proof. So this entire video is an exercise in your faith in me and your faith in this person that I'm not going to name, who's just one of the most brilliant minds ever. And it's an exercise in your faith in us to just believe that we're telling you the truth and that this really does prove God. You're literally telling people that you just have to accept that it proves God and accept that it's true. This is fucking frustrating.
And allow me to dwell on this for a second, because I think it's really important and largely neglected. I want you to ask yourself if there are true concepts, known or unknown, that are beyond your intellectual ability to understand. Anyone who's honest will have to admit that yes, there are concepts that fit that description. Well, God, by definition, is far greater than any of those concepts. So when you demand proof be given to you, you're assuming that you can grasp one of the most intellectually remote concepts imaginable.
I feel at this point that this entire video is just a really long way to say God exists, and that's all you gotta know. You just gotta have faith that he exists. We can't really know if God does or does not exist, but trust me, we've got books and smart motherfuckers that definitely say that God exists. So just believe us, suck that Jesus dick.
God, by definition, is beyond any human capacity to fully understand. So when you demand proof in such a way that you can fully understand it, it's self-contradictory. And you should probably stop doing that because it makes you look silly.
No, asking for proof that something ridiculous like God exists is something that you should be doing and does not make you look silly. I'm so frustrated over this video because he's sitting there telling people that you just gotta believe him and to not ask questions. Don't ask for proof because this is one of the most unprovable things that you could ever ask for proof for. So you just gotta believe that God exists because it's a test of faith. I feel like I laid out previously at the very start of this that if God has a real effect on our universe, we should be able to detect and quantify that. So to tell somebody, no, don't ask questions or don't expect any real evidence for this God, you just got to believe us because we got a really old book. We've also got this old motherfucker over here that's really good at math, and we all think that he exists. So You should just trust us and believe that he exists. This video is so fucking dumb. You know who's the silly motherfucker here? This guy right here.
What this tells us is that any proof for God's existence is really only a human formula that attempts to render it for us in an accessible and a logical way. But any human formula will rely on the cleverness of whoever formulates it, and there will always be somebody who is cleverer out there, so these concepts will always be in dispute. In other words, human logic will always be contentious. That doesn't prove or disprove God's existence. And this particular proof is no different.
You know, I highly contest this because, I mean, that is true for the God question. There's always going to be somebody out there to refute the dumb fucking arguments that religious people come up with because they're dumb fucking arguments. That's why. But if you expand this into the greater scientific community, there's nobody that seriously questions whether or not gravity is a thing. Like, we have questions about what causes gravity and what gravity really is and all that, which a lot of that's been cleared up. But I mean, we're still figuring some shit out just in physics and quantum mechanics and all this other shit. The fact is that fundamentally, nobody questions whether or not gravity exists. Of course, there's flat earthers that question it and everything like that. I'm talking about serious scientists, experts in their fields. And I realize this might sound a bit similar to what he's saying, but the big difference is they don't want you to stop asking questions, and they can literally show you why they are correct. It seems like, to me, the only person that would want you to stop asking questions and not seek answers elsewhere that rebut what you're saying is somebody that only wants you to listen and believe. That's exactly what Brian is wanting you to do here.
So I think that's enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and put the proof up on the screen here right away. I'm not going to leave it up there for very long because I don't want to drag out the time of this video, so feel free to pause it and to stare at it. But as you do so, I want you to ask yourself, does it make any difference to you? Chances are you're among the 99.9% of people who have no idea what it means, even though it's been confirmed confidently that it is valid logic, even though the rest of us wouldn't know one way or the other.
Confirmed. Logic can be valid. Like, you can make a valid argument for God existing, let's say, from beauty. The form of the logical argument can be valid. The question is whether or not it's sound. Is it sound? Is it a sound argument? Like, does the argument actually substantiate or support the conclusion that it comes to? That is the big thing.
But that's what demanding proof gets you. If you're going to ask the most difficult questions imaginable, unless you're insanely arrogant, you should be prepared for responses that exceed your ability to understand.
Okay, I get that. I definitely have come into situations where I've asked questions that supersede my current knowledge, and I just simply don't understand it. That's why I ask questions. That's also why I ask other people. That's why I go outside of it, so that I can see from different perspectives on why that person is right or wrong. That's why you go and you find other people that are on the opposite, people that say that this guy's bullshit. Does their argument make sense? Like, is what they're saying essentially true about what the argument does? Looking outside of it is good. You're essentially asking people to just believe this, to listen and believe without doing any kind of fact checking, without doing any kind of, just using your own innate knowledge that apparently 99% of the population, at least as you seem to indicate earlier, will not understand. So you have to understand how this is just simply not convincing. If you understand it, then please explain it to us. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. I don't care. Just sit there and actually explain it to me so that I can understand what your argument is. Don't just preface it with saying, you're too dumb to understand this, but I'll tell you anyways. You just gotta believe me that it's right. What's the point in this fucking video other than to tell people to just listen and believe in shit?
Which means that you either have to walk away empty-handed or make sense of the explanations which are offered at your level and admit that whatever conclusion you adopt, it's adopted at least partly on faith.
So before we get into this hot mess, you don't have to accept things on faith. You can accept things on the empirical data that are given to you. You should be able to. The empirical data that shows you that the statements are true, the axioms are true, the presuppositions are true. Like, you should have like information that says these things. Hey heathens, Future GE here. I'm just wanting to pop in real quick and give you some information that I learned after analyzing this argument for God. This argument was proposed by Kurt Gödel, and it was met with a lot of criticism, and a lot of the criticism is similar to what I'm about to present here. What it essentially boils down to is that these axioms are unsubstantiated and are just sort of stated to be true, when really there's a lot more subjectiveness to like what is a positive property. And due to this fact, what you end up having are two other problems that stem off of it. For one thing, it causes a modal collapse, meaning that everything becomes an essential aspect or an essential property. There's no distinguishing between essential and contingent properties in this particular argument. Another thing is that you can use this argument to prove any God that you want to, considering the subjectiveness of what is a positive property. Since you can define a positive property to be whatever you want to, you can use this argument to prove whatever God that you want. So it really doesn't seem like this argument is all that great at doing its job, which means that it's practically useless to us. Thank you, heathens. I hope you enjoyed the show today, and I will let my past self continue with my meandering around this horrible argument for God. All right, so let's see. Axiom 1, whatever the fuck that is. Here's a problem, is that with mathematical proofs, I feel like you're going to need some explanation, because like people haven't had discrete mathematics classes. Like they wouldn't know what this little upside down A is, like an enumeration symbol. Okay, so let's go through this. Definition 1. X is godlike if and only if X has as essential properties those and only those properties which are positive. Okay, so whatever X is, if it's godlike, it only has positive properties. They're essential and positive. Definition 2. A is an essence of X. All right, if and only if for every property B, X has B necessarily, if and only if A entails B. For every property B, A has to entail that it would have that property B. X necessarily exists if and only if every essence of X is necessarily exemplified. I don't know where that gets us. Okay, axiom 1. If a property is positive, then its negation is not positive. I mean, barring, I feel like that's kind of context sensitive. I don't really think that you can have like that kind of axiom. I feel like he's getting into like absolute values, like absolute positivity and absolute negativity, maybe, because like a property being positive is context sensitive. So I don't feel like axiom 1 can really be supported. Axiom 2, any property entailed by, i.e. strictly implied by, a positive property is positive. Okay, so if a property is implied by a positive property, it is therefore positive. Well, this suffers from the same problem as axiom 1. Axiom 3, the property of being godlike is positive. I don't think so. Have you ever fucking met like other gods? Or not met, but like have you ever thought of other gods? Like, what does it even mean to be godlike? So he's saying that godlike is absolutely positive, no matter what. But that's actually kind of a unique thing in religions, as far as it being, absolutely positive. So I guess he's saying that a godlike figure can only ever be positive. I think you would have to substantiate that. It just feels like you're pulling that out of your ass and saying, oh yeah, God's definitely an absolutely and only positive figure. That's just pulling it out of your ass. If a property is positive, then it is necessarily positive. Context sensitive, I don't think that you can assert that something is absolutely positive. Axiom 5, necessary existence is positive. I mean, I guess so. I don't know how you would even substantiate this, but all right. Axiom 6, for any property P, if P is positive, then being necessarily P is positive. All of these things are very dependent on context. So I don't really think that you can definitely say that it's a positive trait is necessarily positive. Theorem 1, if a property is positive, then it is consistent, i.e. possibly exemplified. Corollary 1, the property of being godlike is consistent. All right, so I feel like corollary 1 is saying that to be godlike is possibly exemplified. I feel like this is saying that God is possible. I can agree that God is possible. I don't think that the Christian God's possible, but maybe some kind of generic deity figure might be, I guess. Theorem 2, if something is godlike, then the property of being godlike is an essence of that thing. Theorem 3, necessarily the property of being godlike is exemplified. Is it? I don't know. I feel like this comes roundabout in a very circular, logic-y way, because at the very beginning with his definitions, he assumes things about being godlike, and then at the very end, he says, oh, well, godlike, the property of being godlike is an essence of that thing, meaning that it's intrinsic to that thing, and therefore it is exemplified. I feel like it's just a circular argument. Yeah, I don't see how this is supposed to prove anything to anybody. I don't know why he's got them all out of order over here. So let's take definition 1. God, I guess, has property positive. This definitely seems fishy. I can understand why you wouldn't want people being able to understand this, because it just seems like it just seems like a really complicated way to just say God exists. God has been proven to exist because God is good. I feel like that's what this argument is. Like, God is positive or God is good, therefore he exists. Because apparently godlike is absolutely positive, and because of that, God exists. Maybe. I don't know. I'd really be interested to hear what you guys think about it. I still love the fact that he prefaces the entire video with, "You're too stupid to understand it." And then he puts up all these mathematical equations, and then he puts up the explanation of what those mathematical equations imply logically. And I feel like that's just to throw off and scare people. Like, all these logical digressions, like the way that he put it, I feel like scares a lot of people. But it just really seems like, oh, God is good all the time, and all the time, God is good. I feel like him prefacing it with saying that you're too dumb to understand this and still giving it to you, but also saying that you just got to trust us and it's to test your faith. I feel like that's kind of shady there. I mean, the fact that he doesn't want people to actually go and hear from experts on how dumb as fuck his whole premise is, I feel like he's just wanting you to listen and believe. And that's what the entire video is about. I wasn't impressed with his mathematical proof for God. It's not that I didn't understand like what the mathematical formulas were saying. It's just that there was no context given. And then he gives the explanation, but still the mathematical formulas are just pulling shit out of his ass in order to say that God, or being godlike, is an absolutely positive thing, is something that can't be substantiated. And it's like, I can make a similar mathematical argument just talking about the squirrel, the magical squirrel that spills his nuts and creates the universe. His entire mathematical argument there is sitting on shaky foundation that doesn't actually prove that a God. It might prove that like certain aspects of his Christian God are logically sound. That goes nowhere to prove that God definitely exists. None of that actually proves that God actually exists. I get it, you're trying to establish the internal consistency of your God, but I feel like the entire argument just baselessly asserts what God is and then proves that he exists based on other shit that you pulled out of your ass just to make it work. That's what it seemed like to me. But who am I? I'm not a mathematician. I'm just an engineer. Software engineer at that, so take that for what you will. If you will, though, please go down below, let me know what you thought about his proof. We spent some time here kind of discussing it, looking through it. Maybe there was just something that I wasn't seeing, I'm not sure, but let me know down below in the comments what you thought about it. Did it actually prove that God exists, or do you think like me, and do you think that it was really just a pile of shit? Let me know down below. Hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this content here. I guess if you're leaving out right now, we'll see you guys next week on Friday. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice.